Welcome to the Shorten Anime channel. Today we'll dive into the latest episode of The Great Ruler. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. The Great Ruler Season 1 Episode 9. The Northern Spiritual Field Training? When Mu Chen heard these words, he was slightly stunned. The Northern Spiritual Field was a famous danger zone within the Northern Spiritual Realm. It had a vast territory and a variety of fierce spiritual beasts were spread across it. There would be many adventurer teams that entered it to hunt spiritual beasts. Also, there were many rare materials and elixirs within the Northern Spiritual Field. It could be considered as a treasure place. Of course, if you want to take the treasure out, you must have sufficient strength to do so. Otherwise, you might not be able to obtain any treasure and lose your life there. Because the Northern Spiritual Field was filled with resources, even Mu Chen's father would personally lead his men into the Northern Spiritual Field from time to time. Every time they entered, they were bound to have many tragic fights. That's right. We, the Northern Spiritual Academy's Heaven class, would organize the students and head to the Northern Spiritual Field for training every now and then. This is because only a true battle would have the effects of tempering oneself. Tang Connor nodded and smiled as she spoke. For the training, we are permitted to form a two-man team, and the top 3 teams that have the best results would have a special reward. Reward? What is it? Mu Chen lifted an eyebrow. It said that it would be accumulation elixir this time. Tang Qian'er thought for a moment and said, Accumulation elixir? Mu Chen was astonished. This elixir was said to be extremely beneficial for beginners like them, who had only started their training. The elixir's medical effects were mild and it would not leave any after effects. With their spiritual movement stage middle phase strength, they would soon charge at the spiritual movement strength late phase if they were to take it. Yes, if I am able to obtain an accumulation elixir, I should be able to advance into spiritual movement stage late phase. And I would begin my preparations to enter the spiritual rotation stage in the future, Tang Qian'er said. How would they judge the results? Mu Chen asked curiously. It was obvious that the accumulation elixir had piqued his interest. It's simple. They will look at who killed the most spiritual beasts and which ones is the highest rank. Tang Qian'er continued to speak. Because all the students in the Heaven class are allowed to participate, therefore there is quite a bit of competition. This is also why I want to get you. I only reached the spiritual movement stage middle phase. Shouldn't you look for someone stronger when you form a team? With Sister Qian'er's charm, I believe that many powerful individuals in both the East Branch and West Branch would want to form a team with you, right? Mu Chen smiled and asked, You're not willing? Tang Qian'er let out a slight Then she waved the dark red jaded script within her hand. That's something that I would wish for. However, if we fail to obtain the accumulation elixir, please do not blame me for dragging you down. Mu Chen smiled. The words he said weren't just common courtesy. After all, he only had the strength of a spiritual movement stage middle phase. There are many candidates that were more suitable than him in the Northern Spiritual Academy. Tang Qian'er thought for a moment. Then she let out a light laugh. It doesn't matter if we fail to obtain it. I am confident that I would reach the spiritual rotation stage within a year, even if I do not rely on the elixir. As she said this, her slender fingers gently twirled the jaded script. She glanced towards Mu Chen and said, And I don't like forming teams with others. Since Sister Qian'er thinks so highly of me, I will sacrifice my life and accompany you. Don't worry, Sister Qian'er. Even if I have to risk my puny life, I will definitely help you obtain the accumulation elixir. Mu Chen had a smile on his face as he pretended to be heroic and patted his chest. What a sweet talker. Tang Qian'er blushed as she stared at him. Then what about this spiritual art? Mu Chen smiled as he stared at the jaded script in Tang Qian'er's hand. Don't do this again next time. Tang Qian'er grunted. She held on to the spiritual art as she turned around and headed towards the outside of the spiritual arts room. When Mu Chen noticed this, he immediately followed. At the door of the spiritual arts room, Tang Qian'er registered the spiritual art. When the old man that manages the spiritual arts room noticed the dark red spiritual art, he glanced at Tang Qian'er and hesitated for a moment. After all, this limitless death seal had a vicious name attached to it. Although Tang Qian'er met the requirements, he still did not want to see a beautiful girl being harmed by this spiritual art. When Mu Chen noticed the old man hesitating, his heart was slightly anxious. He knew that the spiritual arts room's old man Qin was an extremely inflexible person. As long as he did not like a person, then that person would not be able to bring any spiritual arts away from his place. Also, don't judge based on his appearance. He may seem like he is about to die, but his strength is at the level of spiritual rotation stage late phase. He is just a step away from reaching the spirit stage. In the past, many cocky students suffered because of him. Fortunately, Tang Qian'er seemed to have some method on dealing with this old man. Her pretty face let out a pure smile and she called him Grandpa Chin. This made the old man nod his head cheerfully. After he warned her repeatedly, he still handed the spiritual art to Tang Qian'er. Mu Chen followed Tang Qian'er out of the spiritual art room silently. The latter let out a triumphant smile and threw the jaded script towards him. "It's all thanks to you." Mu Chen caught the jaded script and fiddled around with it for a moment. Joy appeared in his black eyes. Then he gave a smile towards Tang Qian'er. If it wasn't for Tang Qian'er today, then it would still be difficult to borrow it out from that old man Tai, even when he qualified for it. Tang Qian'er smiled. She stared helplessly at the jaded script in Mu Chen's hand. "You should be careful. If anything is wrong, you should immediately stop training in it." "Yes, then I'll head back first." As Mu Chen held the jaded script, he already couldn't wait to start deep down inside. He waved towards Tang Qian'er and quickly left. The girl stared at Mu Chen's figure as it quickly vanished. She could not help but pout. That blockhead. The cold moonlight poured down from the sky and turned into a beam as it landed in the quiet room. Inside this room, a boy was quietly sitting cross-legged. His black eyes stared at the dark red, jaded script that was gripped tightly in his hand. Mu Chen stared at the jaded script for a moment. Then he gently let it touch his forehead. As the spiritual energy circulated, the jaded script's surface also flashed a dark red light. And as the light flashed, a large amount of information flowed out from the jaded script and directly injected itself into Mu Chen's brain. Mu Chen closed his eyes tightly and accepted the training method for the limitless death seal. Shortly after, he opened his eyes and let out a breath. Within his black eyes, it was filled with theories. After all, the limitless death seal had an extremely vicious name before. Therefore, Mu Chen did not dare to be too careless. Instead, he repeatedly looked at the training method before he began to start training in it. Mu Chen sat down cross-legged and his hands were attuned to each other. His fingers wounded and formed an exquisite seal. He moved his mind and dark black lights flashed on his body. A trace of dark black spiritual energy began to linger around his palm. The dark black spiritual energy was like a black snake. It would constantly twist in his palm as Mu Chen changed the seals. It gradually formed into a faint black light seal. However, condensing this light seal was not easy. Thus, a faint sound rang out, and the twisting dark black spiritual energy shattered before the seal was condensed. Mu Chen did not mind this first failure of his. If this limitless death seal was successfully learned this easily, he would not have that big of an interest in it. Mu Chen refocused his mind and began again. Failed and failed. The time passed by quickly, yet Mu Chen continued to train in it tirelessly. The seal that was formed in his hands were gradually becoming more proficient, and the condensing speed of the spiritual energy also increased rapidly. His slender hands were like a butterfly passing through flowers. It changed at a curve. Within his palm, the dark black spiritual energy was being twisted. The black light seal was a lot clearer than before. A faint, cold fluctuation emitted out from it. Mu Chen firmly fixed his eyes onto the dark light seal that was about to be formed. His mind was strained to its limit. He had failed at this final step many times. Mu Chen's fingers changed once again, and a dark black spiritual energy flowed into the black light seal. The black light seal suddenly trembled. A humming sound came from it. Afterwards, the black light began to converge, and it directly formed into a dark black light seal and was imprinted onto Mu Chen's palm. When the light seal was imprinted onto Mu Chen's palm, his entire body tensed up. This is because the next step was the most dangerous one. The two seniors that trained in the limitless death seal had snapped their meridians at this step. As the black light seal was imprinted onto his palm, Mu Chen was quickly aware of a violent fluctuation emitting from the light seal. Then it rushed ferociously through the meridians at his palm. This appearance was like it was trying to destroy the meridians. However, it was lucky that Mu Chen was prepared for it. A dark black spiritual energy rumbled and rushed out from his aura sea. It then collided with the violent fluctuations. A low humming sound erupted from within Mu Chen's body. The fluctuations from the limitless death seal were abnormally violent. It was like a wild beast as it charged towards the dark black spiritual energy, which sealed it off. It attempted to destroy it. However, the dark black spiritual energy that came from the great pagoda art was not like it imagined. It was obvious that it was not easy to deal with it. Facing against the violent impact, the dark black spiritual energy completely exposed its domineering nature. It used an extremely powerful oppression and completely resisted the impact. Bam! Waves of impacts continued. However, Mu-Chen did not dare to relax the slightest bit. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead. If he failed to block them, he would probably be gravely injured. Mu-Chen drew out all the spiritual energy within his aura sea and tried his best to defend against the impacts. The impacts lasted approximately for 10 minutes, then it finally began to weaken. When Mu-Chen discovered that the impact had completely vanished, his tensed body limped down. Sweat covered his clothes and he was breathing heavily. Although his body was abnormally tired, Mu-Chen still held excitement within his eyes. He trembled slightly as he opened his right hand. At the center of his palm, there was a dark seal engraving that made others feel a chill. Did I succeed? Mu-Chen stared at the black seal engraving in the center of his palm. The corners of his lips were raised and a smile of relief appeared. Northern Spiritual Academy, training ground. Many students were sweating as if it had rained. A loud and clear cry, mixed with vitality, spread out far away. Mu-Chen was sitting under the shades of a tree. He lazily leaned on the trunk as he stared idly at the various heated duels. It was obvious that these duels did not interest him. Oi, although you have excellent results right now, you shouldn't be so sloppy, right? A slender figure suddenly blocked Mu-Chen's view. Then, Tang Qian'er's voice playfully rang out. Mu-Chen stared at the slim waistline in front of him. Then, he slowly moved his eyes up. The girl's apricot color dress, slightly lifted up soft chest and slender figure, made her quite attractive. As he looked at the girl's beautiful face, Mu-Chen did a stretch and said, "It's not that I'm acting sloppy, but these duels are useless to me." In the spiritual road, he did not know how many times he experienced battles of life and death. At that location, nobody was able to use any spiritual energy, thus they must push their minds to the limit and use their wisdom. Just a little bit of negligence and the cruel fate of being disqualified would occur. Then, they would only be able to wait at the safety zone until the trial was over. And compared to that place, the gentle duels between students in the Northern Spiritual Academy would have no effects on Mu-Chen. You only know how to boast. Tang Qian'er hummed softly. Yet her beautiful eyes could not help but look at the comforting face of his. There was a gentle smiling intent in his black eyes as well as a sense of calmness deep inside that not many people possess at his age. It made others slightly immersed in them. Tang Qian'er also sat down beside Mu-Chen. She then stretched out her slender hands and unlocked her ponytail. Her bluish-black hair suddenly poured down like a waterfall. The scene was so touching, and it instantly attracted a lot of attention over. Envious looks were thrown to Mu-Chen in the end. This person really is great to have such a treatment. That's right. How did your training in the Limitless Death Seal go? There weren't any problems, right? Tang Qian'er tilted her head and she asked with her eyebrow lifted. Mu-Chen smiled. He extended his palm over towards Tang Qian'er. In his palm, a looming black seal slowly came out while emitting a cold chill. You succeeded? Tang Qian'er gently opened her mouth as she made a shocked expression. She could not help but immediately grabbed onto Mu-Chen's hand and stared at the black seal on his palm. Her fingers poked at the black seal. A cold chill penetrated through it and made her body shiver. It can only be considered as succeeding the first step, but it must be continuously nurtured by my spiritual energy. Mu-Chen shook his head and he moved his gaze. He noticed that a lot of eyes were heating up in the surrounding and immediately let out a soft cough. He said, "You'll pull in a lot of hatred for me if you continue to do this." Only then did Tang Qian'er recover. Her face instantly turned red and she quickly let go of Mu-Chen's hand. Not that far away, Luotong stared at this scene. His eyes were a bit sulky. Tang Qian'er was the East Branch's flower. He naturally liked her as well. Moreover, Tang Qian'er's father was also one of the Northern Spiritual Realm's territory lord. His father had once mentioned that if he was able to obtain Tang Qian'er's love, then their strength would increase tremendously after the Luo territory and Tang territory teamed up. This idea was definitely good, but Luo Tong did not manage to obtain this girl's heart like his father had wished for. Instead, Tang Qian'er treated him quite cold. This made him extremely frustrated, and now he saw how close Mu-Chen and Tang Qian'er were, and he was naturally jealous. Brother Luo, that guy really is insolent. Zhang Li and Teng Yong stood beside Luo Tong, and jealously stared at Mu Chen as they spoke. Although they were unhappy seeing this scene, they knew that Mu Chen wasn't that easy to deal with. Therefore, they did not act arrogantly as they would usually and pick a quarrel with him. He is only just a newbie that recently entered the heaven class, yet he dares put on airs in front of me. Luotong's eyes were dark, and his eyes immediately turned around. He stared at Tan Qingshan, who was sweating like mad as he trained nearby, and let out a cold smile. Zhang Li, go find Tan Qingshan and have a duel with him. Remember, you must take good care of the newbies. Zhang Li was startled for a moment. He hesitated and said that Tan Qingshan has a good relationship with Mu Chen. If I were to cause trouble for Tan Qingshan, then Mu Chen would probably... I'm here. What are you afraid of? Luotong frowned as he asked. When Zhang Li noticed the dissatisfaction within Luotong, he did not dare to say anything more. He immediately got up and walked quickly towards Tan Qingshan. Tan Qingshan, who was in the middle of his training, noticed that Zhang Li was coming for him. He frowned for a bit, but he did not say anything as he was not very talkative. He continued to practice a fist technique. Tan Qingshan, I'll have a duel with you for a bit. This way, you will be able to improve much faster. As an old hand, I should take care of you newbies, Zhang Li said as he directed a malicious smile towards Tan Qingshan. After the surrounding students witnessed this, they immediately understood what Zhang Li wanted to do. However, nobody dared to say anything because of Luotong's dark gaze coming from nearby. This kind of duel was definitely quite normal. These guys are really going too far. When Tang Qianer saw this scene, she immediately frowned. She tried to get up, but her wrist was pulled by Mu Chen. What is it? Tang Qianer looked at Mu Chen suspiciously. It was obvious that Luotong and the others troubled Tan Qingshan in order to allow Mu Chen to see it. It could be regarded as a deliberate show of strength as a warning. Although Tan Qingshan is silent, he has a stubborn personality. Sometimes he does not need any help. Do not underestimate a man's pride, Mu Chen said faintly. The act of old hands bullying newcomers would appear everywhere. If I were to come forward and help him, it might allow him to be less troubled. However, this isn't something that he needs. Moreover, in extreme situations, he might even drift apart from me. So in order to avoid this kind of trouble, he must use his own abilities to tell the others that he isn't someone that everybody can just bully. But he isn't Zhang Li's opponent, Tang Qianer said. Victory isn't just about beating down the other. Mu Chen smiled slightly and said, as long as he is able to let the others know that he isn't a pushover and that they would have to pay some sort of price in order to push him around, it is fine. Tang Qianer thought for a moment. She felt that there were some truths within Mu Chen's words. However, she still hesitated and said, even though you're younger than me by a year, why did you pretend to be so old? Mu Chen smiled. He looked at Tan Qingshan, whose face color changed. The latter clenched and loosened his hands in a cycle. He seemed to struggle for a bit before he stared towards Mu Chen. Mu Chen gave a smile to Tan Qingshan and gently nodded. Seeing Mu Chen smile, Tan Qingshan gripped his hands tightly. Fierceness appeared within his eyes and he coldly said, then, Senior Zhang Li, please advise me. Zhang Li was startled when he saw that Tan Qingshan actually accepted and immediately let out a sneer. He really is a boy who had no idea of his own limitations. The two individuals slowly retreated backwards and many students surrounded them. However, it was obvious that many of them felt that Tan Qingshan was really unlucky this time. Under the crowd's gaze, the duel instantly began. It was just like everyone had expected. This duel was simply one-sided as their strength was at different levels. However, everybody's sympathy gradually changed shortly after, because they saw Tan Qingshan continue to charge at Zhang Li without the slightest fear of death. Even when he was repeatedly kicked down by Zhang Li, he did not show any signs of surrendering. The crazy, imposing manner coming from his red eyes even shocked Zhang Li. Bang, bang, bang! The two figures interweaved at the grounds. Although Tan Qingshan was quite helpless, he risked being hit by Zhang Li a few times in order to bite at him. When Zhang Li blew away Tan Qingshan again with his fist, the latter continued to pounce forward and bit into his arm. It left a bloodstain. Zhang Li finally could not stand the mad, wolf-like imposing manner and retreated a few steps. He shouted out, "You're crazy!" Tan Qingshan ignored it, and he pounced forward again with his red eyes. "I quit!" Zhang Li hurriedly escaped. He screamed out loud as he stared at Tan Qingshan's red eyes. The surrounding students rushed forward and pulled at Tan Qingshan. However, the latter was overly crazy right now, and they failed to stop him for a moment. This scene made many students tremble. This Tan Qingshan was truly crazy. Under the surrounding students' shouts, Tan Qingshan gradually calmed down. He had cracked lips, his entire body was filled with pain, and a bruise was even on his face. However, his eyes were filled with excitement. In front of him, Zhang Li's clothes were also ripped a lot. Although he did not have any injuries, his filthy face and the horror in it were visible to everyone. Tan Qingshan might have lost in strength, but he won in terms of imposing manner. This was enough to make the other heaven-class students look at him with new eyes. Tan Qingshan wiped the blood from his mouth and looked towards Mu Chen. The latter smiled and gave him a thumbs up. Amazing! Tan Qingshan rubbed his head and smiled. He felt gratitude towards Mu Chen, as he had given him a chance to win back his pride with his own efforts. In the future, there aren't many old hands that would probably come to bully him. That guy has quite a crazy nature. Tang Qianer also smiled. Tan Qingshan's craziness earlier even made her slightly alarmed. Mu Chen smiled as he nodded his head. Then he stood up. "What are you doing?" Tang Qianer asked suspiciously. Tan Qingshan did what he was supposed to do. Next, it's my turn. Others tried to show their strength as a warning, so I must pay them back. Otherwise, it would be quite troublesome. Mu Chen smiled and he gripped his right hand tightly. Also, I wanted to find a person to test how powerful the limitless death seal is. Mu Chen slowly walked forward. Then, under many people's gazes, he entered the grounds and stared at the gloomy Luo Tong. "Senior Luo Tong, I recently learned a spiritual art, and I wanted to invite Senior over to give me some guidance. I hope that you would advise me as well." That wraps up the content for today's episode. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications for the next episode. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.